Everybody, welcome to your online lecture notes. Today we're going to talk the 10 important pre-modern migrations that everyone must know. These are big, big, big issues in the history of the world, and they're the 10 big ones that I'm sorry, this is modern, not pre-modern. They're the 10 big ones that you're going to definitely know for your exam. For now, though, just buckle in. I want to tell you the pre-modern migrations. You just need to kind of watch. Basically, people started in Africa. This is way, 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 way back in the history of time. We start from Africa and we move out to Europe and we move east into Asia. Then the next biggest one is people from Asia moving towards Southeast Asia and Indonesia, also Australia. Then people moving across the land bridge to the Americas. Then people moving south into both Americas. Then out to Hawaii. Then people be everywhere, 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 everywhere. Right? So the pre-modern migrations are essentially starting in Africa and spreading out, and then just all of a sudden, just boom, 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 we've covered the entire globe. But what you do need to pay more close attention to are the top 10 modern migrations, and that's what you're going to be quizzed on tomorrow, and you definitely need to know. So just to define that for you, uh, modern migration needs to be three things. It needs to be after 1492. I wonder why 1492. It needs to be intercontinental, meaning from one country to another, from one continent to another, and it needs to have a wide impact on history. So these 10 examples you will probably have heard of in some way or shape before, but you need to definitely write them down. On your paper that I gave you, you're going to have some boxes under or above the map. I can't quite remember, where you're going to jot down notes. I can't help you with what to write down on this one. You have to kind of use your AP mega brain and figure out what is important and what is not important out of these things. The other thing you're going to want to do is follow along by creating and drawing the arrows that I show you. It will really help if you have multiple colors so that you can color code the arrows. There are 10, so if you want to take a break and go find 10 colors, you can go ahead and pause me now. All right, welcome back. I snapped. Thought that was cool. So the first major migration from this century, I kind of clued in earlier. It's from 1492. Guess who? Columbus sailing the ocean blue. And essentially that is people from Western Europe, Spain, basically, the Iberian Peninsula. It's from the Iberian Peninsula, going to the Americas, right? This was a voluntary migration, but it was also a huge migration. They went for opportunity, for spice and gold. The Spanish and the Portuguese people are the ones that went. They brought their culture and their money and their development, and the legacy of this is absolutely huge. I mean, people still speak Spanish or Portuguese in Latin America, right? They did not before. So people are still largely Roman Catholic. They were not before. So there are huge impacts. And was this good for the Spanish? Oh, heck yes, right? They made tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of money. El Dorado, the city of gold, is kind of a myth built around how much gold they actually found in the Americas, right? But was it good for the indigenous people? And this is sort of the stuff we didn't learn back in the day, but no. In fact, this is resulting from this migration is maybe the largest genocide in history. They brought with them war. They brought with them disease. And oddly enough, we have historical documents that show us that they used those diseases intentionally to slaughter hundreds of thousands in cities and kill the indigenous people. It was really, really, really awful. So really good and has a huge impact for the Iberian Peninsula, but a huge negative impact for the indigenous people that live there. The second one we need to know is everyone moving from the Americas, moving from Europe to the Americas, basically from England and France. This was kind of as a direct result of seeing how well Spain did and thinking like, oh, we want some gold too, and we show up to America and all we find are trees. It ended up being a good deal, but still we found some farmland. We found silver. That's kind of nice. It's not nothing. But why did they come? Well, people came for the money, for the opportunity. This was technically a voluntary migration as well. But depending on who you are, also a little bit for persecution. We know that King George kind of, what is it? Is it George? I think it's George. But the Puritans came because they felt like they were being persecuted, and they were in large part being persecuted. So in that place, it could be forced migration, but generally it was for opportunity and money. Especially the French. The French came over mostly to Canada and wanted to make some money, which they did. The third one you're going to want to know, and this is so hard for me because as a geographer, it's called a forced migration, but we all know this one. This is the large movement of people from West Africa to the Americas. This is in geography, we call this a forced migration. In reality, we know what this is. People were tricked, stolen, kidnapped, and forced onto boats, never to see their homeland again, and brought to be slaves to the Americas. A question that I got after school was, are slaves part of that OG group of migrants in America? And the answer is yes, right? They are part of the original migrant population. We count them as migrants in that way. However, it was a forced migration. And even though, if you take a look at the density of those arrows, even though it was really awful and terrible that this happened in America, you can see that it happened in way, way larger numbers in the Caribbean as well as in South America. So, no innocent parties there, but it was 11 million people in total were brought from West Africa. Again, totaling that next to the Holocaust is just like 12. It's a pretty awful thing that happened. But that's forced migration, definitely forced migration, and that's from Africa to America, to the Americas. The fourth large move we need to know, and you need to know well, is the move of the Chinese to basically everywhere they could reach by boat. So they went to Southeast Asia, Indonesia. Well, obviously it's in Southeast Asia, but and then to America in the mid 1800s. Was this forced or voluntary? Well, voluntary. China was in the midst of a stage 2 population explosion, right? The death rate was down, but the birth rate was still really high. So the more people there are in your land, the more opportunity diminishes. So they left for work. They went off to find their fortune elsewhere. In American history, you can think trains. This was in the early 1800s. And so we used them as workers for trains. The immigrant experience has not always been good in the United States. I don't know, there's like one group of people who it was really good for, and that was the first group, and then everyone else we've been kind of being bratty about anytime they come over, and the Chinese were no different. In fact, the Chinese were the first group to ever be shut down. It was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. You should jot that down. That's the thing quiz questions are made of. And with them also, this is about the time the Irish came, but you don't need to know that. We were really trying to push people out of the United States, or we were trying to push certain people out of the United States. The next one you need to know is Britain to Australia and New Zealand and South Africa. And boy, what is the cause of that? Well, it's the cause of almost everything in geography. The British aren't just going in one direction. They're going in three. So One Direction, like the band from Britain, like the British band One Direction, but they're actually going three. Anyway, the answer is colonialism or imperialism. They took over most of Africa and just bled it dry. They took the resources from Africa and they colonized South Africa. They also colonized Australia, where they sent lots of their like prisoners and debtors. But why this counts as a migration is a lot of those settlers who went to go do those things permanently colonized that area. So that's something you should definitely know. The next one, and we're getting close here, is from India to England, and South Africa and Indonesia. India, again, stage 2. It's a voluntary migration. Britain took over India, so the cultural friction is low. You might ask, like, why the UK? Well, Britain had been dominating and oppressing India for so long that actually, culturally, it was not that difficult for them to move to England. They followed their colonial oppressors back home. So some of them were forced in that manner, but most it was voluntary migration. They were looking for work. They were looking for opportunity. Um, the next one we've already talked about. It was West Russians to the easy East Russia. It's continental in that they're moving from Eastern Europe to Asia, so it counts. And this is when the communist powers had taken over. This is the USSR, the big bad USSR, forcing migration to the east because they need workers, right? They have all this land, all these resources, and no one wants to go out there because it's the middle of the freaking Antarctic, or just the Arctic, not the Antarctic. It's cold and terrible, but they force people out there to go do that. Um, the next you want to look at and kind of color code, take some notes on. This is a huge deal in your U.S. history class, as well as your world history class, as well as your human geography class, and that is the mass movement of the Jewish people, or they call it the Jewish diaspora, which means a scattering of people from everywhere back to Israel. So the Jews were persecuted for a very, 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 very long time, something in the ballpark of 1500, 1600 years, right? Actually 2000, maybe even more. And they were pushed out of um, their original land. Surviving Jews from that persecution after World War II finally return, and this did not happen easily. In fact, it took many, many nation states, one of the U.S. is part of them, to actually force the Jewish people back into Israel. And I don't say force them because they didn't want to go. I mean force them back because people were already there and had been living there for the last 1500 years or so. So the movement of Jews, the Jewish diaspora back to Israel, is a huge deal. Not because it was the most amount of people ever, but because it truly, truly is a incredibly contentious issue and has sparked debate and war and battle and just we talk about it all the time. The U.S., in case you were wondering, supports Israel, right? So you might have heard the Israel-Palestine conflict. That's what that is. It's the Palestinian people who were there and had been there for a very long time. All of a sudden, had these brand new people showing up, brand new to them, showing up and saying, "Hey, this is our house. Get out of here!" And let the war ensue. So a lot of people have their hands in that cookie jar as well. And it really is interesting that I can actually teach that, because back when I was a student, our schools only supported Israel. So we wouldn't even talk about Palestine or recognize them as a country, so or a people. So it's very cool that we're in a place where we're maybe more real. But anyway, this counts as a voluntary migration. And this one we know, this one is huge, huge, huge. Absolutely will be on your AP test. You should use it as a case study. This is Latin America to the USA. This is 1965-ish to the present, and it is making major, major waves. Voluntary mostly. Think of Mexican migrant workers who are coming for opportunity, as well as South American workers who are coming for opportunity. But some is forced migration because of persecution or a refugee safety, people seeking asylum from drug cartels and gangs, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a huge one, and that is the stuff that we will be debating in the next couple days. So make sure you guys are getting your ideas on that really solidified, and not just coming with the opinions of your parents or what people have told you to think, right? We're going to look at this from a geographical standpoint. Finally, we've already talked about this one too. We know these. This is Northeast Africa and Mideast, and people from the Mideast to Europe. It's mostly voluntary, but recently kind of forced. We're talking Syrian refugees. We're talking all of the awful things that have been happening in the Middle East for the last few years. So this is going to be the most recent, but it's also huge. When we're talking tens of millions of people or 4 million people, geography kind of stands up and takes notice. Boom. And that kind of a cool thing. Tomorrow we're going to talk migration streams. If you want to look at this map, this is sort of the flow of where people go in the world. I hope you guys have a good night. Great work today. I hope you guys give me great work tomorrow so we can get prepped for our debate. See ya. Oh, wait, I paused something else. Now I'm just here being dumb looking. Okay, hold on. I go Control-Shift-R. Nope, that reset it. Control-Shift-S. I wish I was done.